Hi there, my name's Ayers. I write the Substack Money Changes Everything. This week I want to talk about how modern millionaires are made, or at least how I see young people and older people, but for the most part very young people, making a lot more money than they perhaps set out to in their careers because they work for publicly traded companies. So what we're talking about today is equity compensation. Let's break that phrase down. Equity meaning ownership of something, typically owning shares in a company, and compensation, money that you receive for doing work. So equity compensation is, instead of being paid in dollars through your paycheck or through a salary, you are paid in ownership or shares of a company. And typically we see that for these publicly traded companies, meaning companies that are listed on stock market exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. You might be familiar with these companies like Google, Amazon, Datadog, NVIDIA, the big headline grabbing publicly traded stocks. If you work at one of those companies, part of your compensation is probably in a small slice of ownership of those companies. So Google is a great example because Google has, we've seen a fantastic performance of that stock price. It basically continues to go up. Apple is another great example of that. If you work at Google or Apple and you are compensated with shares, your paycheck of shares, your paycheck of ownership is likely going to keep going up as you receive those shares for continuing to work at the company. But today I want to talk about 5 mistakes that I see people make with their equity compensation at publicly traded companies. Simply what we're talking about are typically called RSUs, or restricted stock units, which means that when you're hired or when you get a promotion, sometimes that comes with a nice increase in salary, a nice increase in your regular cash compensation, but sometimes it comes with a grant of RSUs. And so here are the things that I see folks not get wrong, but just stumble over. Number 1, you confuse short and long-term capital gains. So equity compensation is pretty complex, so I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible, but let's say we're going to use Google as a good example. So let's say you got granted 100 shares of Google, and you're going to vest, meaning you're going to receive them in chunks as you continue to work there quarterly over a year. I'm ultra simplifying it. Usually it's over 4 years. So, now it's Q1, we're getting our 25 shares of Google stock today. It's actually April Fool's Day. Happy April Fools. We got our 25 shares that just vested. We just received them. They got released from the share pool so we own them now. And they showed up in our paycheck, right? The value of those 25 shares of Google stock actually showed up on our paycheck. If you look at your paycheck, you'll see something like RSU vest. I'm just making up easy numbers here. Let's say it was $10,000 worth of Google shares that vested. Now that $10,000 number, it's going to show up on your paycheck and you're going to get taxed on that income because you received it. So you got $10,000 worth of Google stock on that day. Now you got to pay the tax. So you've already paid ordinary income tax, meaning short-term capital gains tax, which is the higher rate, as opposed to long-term capital gains. And we're going to talk about that. Okay. So short-term capital gain rates are the same tax rate as ordinary income. So your $100,000, $200,000 salary at Google and that $10,000 of RSUs that vested, they're taxed the same way. But people get confused. And what people do is they say, I want that lower capital gains rate, which is typically 15 or 20% versus our ordinary income rates, our short-term capital gains rates, which could be as high as 37, 40, 50%, depending what state you're in. I want that lower capital gains rate. And this is what people get wrong. They think that if they hold those shares, that $10,000 worth of 25 shares, if they hold it for a year, 365 days, so they get that long-term rate, if they do that, they think they're gonna get that lower rate. What actually happens is you get the lower capital gains rate on the difference between the value on the day you receive the shares, so that $10,000, a year later, let's say they're worth $12,000, now we have that $2,000 gain. Only that part is what's taxed at that lower rate. So holding your RSUs to try to get that lower tax rate is often not a great strategy. So I see people get that wrong all the time. So that was mistake number one. Mistake number two is being too scared to sell, which means those 10,000 shares that vested, $10,000 worth of 25 shares that vested. You're like, Google's going up. I don't want to sell. What if it keeps going up and I'm going to miss out on that? And you don't sell. So you've paid tax on that $10,000 worth of Google shares, but you haven't actually received $10,000 in cash. Now, if it's Google or Apple or one of these fantastically performing stocks, historically, remember, past performance does not guarantee future returns. If we continue to see the stock go up, that's great, but that doesn't always happen, right? Markets are volatile, we never know. So being too scared to sell, being like, oh, this might go up in the future, I see that all the time. We don't sell, we pay tax on the $10,000, 6 months later, 2 years later, that stock has actually gone down. A great example of that from the headlines today is this company, Allbirds, the shoe company, right? A couple years ago, they went public, large market cap, couple $1 billion. Stock price just went down and down and down. So if you had received Allbirds RSU shares a couple years ago, never sold because you thought it was going to go up forever, today you would have paid tax on a higher amount and then sold at a loss. So do not be too afraid to sell your equity. Remember, if you have RSUs, you're constantly getting more shares vesting. So don't be afraid of selling, a vest here and there because there's always more coming at different prices. So that's mistake number two. Mistake number three is selling your equity and then not doing anything with the cash. So let's say mistake number two, you do sell it. It's sitting in your Fidelity or Schwab or wherever your equity is held. You do the sale, you have the cash, and then you freeze. And the cash just sits there in that account. Maybe you're making a little bit of interest because they're nice. But really what you want to do is move that cash to another financial goal. So maybe it's saving for a down payment on a house. Well, let's put it in a high yield savings account. Let's not just leave it in this random account. Typically what we do with our clients is we move it from that single stock into a basket of stocks. So we just don't want what the mistake people make is they sell their equity and then it just sits in cash. So they've moved out of a potentially high growth stock and then it just moves into cash, which typically doesn't keep up with inflation. So I love this idea of getting on a schedule, selling our equity each time it vests, and then moving it out into a diversified portfolio where we don't just own that one stock, we own thousands of stocks. So that's mistake number three, is just letting the proceeds just sit there and fester. Number four is getting hit with an unexpected tax bill. Now, we see this all the time, especially in states like New York, where we have high earners. We have folks working at these, super fantastic tech companies. They're making $200,000-$300,000. And as their equity vests, it's the tax withholding. Remember, it's showing up on your paycheck. The tax withholding is not high enough for what their actual tax rate is. So for example, most of the time when RSUs vest, they're taxed at a 22% rate. That's just the standard supplemental income withholding. Now, if you're making $250,000, maybe you got a spouse who's making some money and you live in New York, your federal tax rate probably is higher than 22%. So what ends up happening is as those shares vest, you don't have enough withholding. So you're gonna get hit at the end of the year with this annoying tax bill that you weren't expecting. And if you haven't sold your shares, you don't have cash to pay it. So the way we avoid that is by doing tax projections early in the year, making sure our withholding is correct, and either adjusting our withholding or making sure we're saving enough cash so we at least know what that tax bill is gonna be. So we don't like unexpected tax bills, but frankly, we see them all the time. And sometimes this really weird thing happens in New York where you owe at the federal level, but at the New York level, you actually end up with a big refund. And unfortunately, the New York State Tax Revenue Collecting Bureau, I forget what it's called, and the IRS don't talk to each other. So unfortunately, you can't just say, hey, I overpaid my taxes by $5,000 in New York. Can you just move that over to the IRS? Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So often there's a bit of a delay to get your refund from the state and then pay the federal, which is why we want to avoid that. So mistake number four is that a surprise tax bill. Last mistake, just letting your equity pile up without a strategy. Having equity consistently vesting at different prices. You're stressed out because the stock price is moving, every second of every day while the markets are open. It's stressful, right? And not having a plan continuously leads to this like decision fatigue. I like to think of it as like the equity roller coaster. Once you're at a public company, your net worth is moving all the time because the price of a share of this company is moving all the time. So not having a plan, we often see leads to paralysis, meaning like, I don't know what to do, I'm not going to sell anything, or I'm going to sell everything because I need to sell it today to get it out because I'm scared of the price moving down. So we really like to have a plan, meaning let's look at all the equity, let's come up with a trading plan, meaning which shares am I going to sell over the next couple years, and then stick to that plan. We need to revise it once in a while, but I really love this idea of when we receive it, while we're sane and we're not watching that stock price move up and down, what do we really want here? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to buy a home? Are we trying to retire early? Are we trying to have some extra cash for a vacation? Let's take those goals in mind, figure out when we might need that money to actually convert from shares of a publicly traded company to cash. When are we going to need that? Let's see if we can have a plan and stick to it. So that's my rambly, five biggest mistakes you can make with equity comp, off the cuff, not a script. So apologies for any, off the cuff errors, but I hope this was helpful if you have RSUs and you work in a publicly traded company. My Substack is Money Changes Everything. You can find me there. Thanks for watching.